Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this local Government Academy webinar on electronic signatures in our local Government Academy series. As those familiar to the series will be aware, the plan with the local Government Academy events is to provide some training for those that are new to local government or those that have been in local government for a long time and want to pick up some new skills. And I'm particularly interested in today's session on electronic signatures, which has been something that is new and that we've all had to get to grips with in recent years. I'm Niall McLean, I'm a partner at Brodies and head of our local government practice. I'm joined today by Martin Sloan, I'm a partner in our commercial services division, and Fiona Beale, our in-house counsel. And just by way of introduction to Martin and Fiona, Fiona tells me that Martin and her are converts to using electronic signatures, having had to go on that journey themselves, implementing Brodies practices and procedures in relation to electronic signatures during the pandemic. Martin and Fiona are both also on the Law Society of Scotland working group on electronic signatures and help prepare the guidance that we're going to be talking about today. So that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction to the webinar. I'll hand over now to Martin, and I'll be back at the end for the Q&A.
Thanks, Neil, and good afternoon. So yeah, today we're going to talk a bit about electronic signatures, and I suppose a few things. We want this to be quite a practical session, so we will talk a bit about the current landscape and scope for using electronic signatures to modernise document signing. We'll talk, but we'll also go back to basics and say, well, what is an electronic signature? So when we're talking about electronic signatures, what do we mean by that? Look at the different types of electronic signatures you get. We will look at what the law says in terms of whether you can actually electronically sign any documents or whether there's anything that's out of scope. We'll talk a bit about which type of signature you might want to use on a particular document, and then talk a bit about the advantages of using a signing platform such as DocuSign or Adobe Sign, and then provide a quick demo just showing how it works and how easy and simple it is. And then we'll finish off with some tips and recommendations, and then any questions that we have at the end. So first off, just in terms of the current landscape, I suppose, and local authorities are like any client, any organisation that we work with, and Neil mentioned, we've been on a bit of a journey in terms of our use of electronic signatures. I am, for those of you that don't know me, I'm a commercial contracts and technology lawyer, so a lot of my clients have been signing things electronically for 10, 15 years since these platforms first became available. But as lawyers, the transactions that we advise on historically weren't really being signed electronically until we got to the pandemic. And I say clients, including local authorities, have signed lots of different types of contracts. Some of them will be, many of them will be in hard copy. Some of them may still be in hard copy, and you may be concerned about signing them electronically. And the idea of today's session, I suppose, is just to perhaps dispel some myths and sort of talk about some of the risks and where we see other organisations going in terms of adopting electronic signatures. But you will, I'm sure, have many different types of contracts and other documents that need to be signed. Lots of different counterparties, so that might be individuals, so maybe tenants in local authority housing, it might be citizens, service users. You'll also have contracts with suppliers and other corporate entities, and indeed arrangements with other public authorities, so data sharing agreements, MOUs, all of those sorts of things. And the thing with electronic signing is that it provides a number of benefits. So the one I put up the top here is one that a lot of clients are really interested in. This is around digital transformation of day-to-day contracting processes. And by that, I don't just mean the internal signing process with an organisation of, say, a commercial contract, but also looking at how other contracting processes can be automated. So, for example, we see, for example, in the student letting sector, a lot of providers of student housing doing everything electronically. So the whole process in terms of applying for the housing, signing up, signing your lease agreement for that is all done electronically, and that works really well because they have a digitally literate customer base. And you can see that then being applied to all sorts of other things where local authorities interact with individuals, with corporates or whatever, and avoid the need to do things by paper. It speeds up the signing process. It enables everyone to be up to date with that. It reduces the risk of those documents being lost, either during signing or indeed afterwards, because you can have multiple copies of the same document. You don't have one principal. It can make it more accessible because if your signatory happens to be on holiday or away or somewhere else, they can just sign that from wherever they are. And it also saves cost because you don't have to print things, you don't have to deal with postage and other storage costs. It saves paper, which is good for the environment as well. And actually, I mean, we'll talk about this when we get on to risk, but actually, with lots of modern signing platforms, they are incredibly secure and actually provide a very, very detailed audit trail around who has signed that document and when. So actually, you get a lot more assurance potentially around the signing process. So what is an electronic signature? Well, anything really, if you agree to contract electronically, is an e-signature in some form. So that could be just typing your name into an email and sending that off. It could be when you tick a box or press I accept when you buy something on Amazon. It could be uploading a photo or a scan of a wetting signature and copying that into a Word document. It could just be typing your name into an electronic document. All of those things are electronic signatures. But really what we're interested in is the more secure versions of that. So that's using a signing platform such as DocuSign or Adobe Sign to sign a document. So an e-signature platform or some form of digital signature backed by a certification digital certificate, like the old Lost Society of Scotland smart card, which used to have a electronic signature on that, which is a particularly secure type of signature. So all of these things are electronic signatures, but as you can imagine, they provide different levels of assurance to anyone seeking to rely upon them. And you can see that here in the table we've got on screen. So the types of electronic signature we have here are the types that are recognised under the EIDAS regulation, which is a bit of EU law that continues to apply in the UK. And that classifies signatures into 3 different types. So we have simple electronic signatures, and that covers everything from the email or JPEG scan that I mentioned to the standard signing functionality in most electronic signing platforms. But I'll talk a bit more about some of the practical differences between those different types of simple signatures. If you have someone just putting their name in an email or putting a signature into a Word document, that provides very little assurance or independent verification of who actually signed that document. But when you look at the signing platforms, they provide a lot more information, and we'll show you a bit more about that. The second category is what's called advanced electronic signatures. So these are recognised under EIDAS, and they are mandated for certain types of document under Scots law. And with that, there is a bit more of a link between the signatory and the signature that's being applied, so it uniquely relates to them. And you can get advanced electronic signatures through some of the major signing platforms. That provides a bit more assurance to anyone looking to rely upon it. And then at the top of the tree, we've got what's called a qualified electronic signature. And this is the most secure type of signature. So in order to get a qualified electronic signature, the signatory has to have their identity verified. That used to be done sort of manually offline by providing your passport. And those of you who had a Lost Society smart card may remember having to visit the Lost Society and go through that process. But with the signing platforms that do this now, they are able to do all of that online in much the same way that some of the banks will verify your ID electronically by taking a photo of you and a scan of your passport. And the thing about qualified electronic signatures is that they are given under the EIDAS regulation the same standing as a wetting signature. But more importantly, under Scots law, they are the only way that you can sign certain types of documents. So I said there are different requirements for certain types of documents. So the basic question, can you electronically sign any document? The answer to that is pretty much yes. However, if a document needs to be registered, then you may or may not be able to do that. So if it needs to go in the Books, Accounts and Session, then you would need to sign that with a qualified electronic signature. And as of October 2022, the Books, Accounts and Session accepted electronic documents for signing. So if you need to register that document, then you would need to use a qualified electronic signature. You can't currently register electronic documents in the Land Register, though that will come at some point as Register Scotland continue to work on that. And then the other thing is if you're dealing with a contract governed by overseas law, or you have a non-UK entity, then there may be some issues in terms of local law. So what we always say with that is that if you're dealing with an overseas party, you would want to check locally whether that entity can sign electronically, whether there's any local laws that might impact on the validity of that signature. So worth always checking on that if you're dealing with that. And as I say, so there are for some documents certain requirements, but for the vast majority of documents that I would expect a local authority to sign, you can use a simple electronic signature to sign that. That's the base position is that unless the requirements of Writing Scotland Act says otherwise, you can sign a document electronically. However, those of you who know the 95 Act will remember that there are certain things within the 1995 Act which need to be signed in a particular way, and those are the documents that are covered under Section 1.2, where there are particular requirements for formal validity, and then also for self-proving status. So if you remember the 95 Act, you remember that there are certain things that if you are dealing with a paper document, they need to be signed in wet ink in a particular way, or may need to be signed in the presence of a witness. Well, what we now have under the 95 Act is a additional set of sections within the Act which deal with electronic signing. And you'll see on screen there that if you're dealing with a Section 1.2 document, then you need to use an advanced electronic signature in order for that to be valid. And if the document needs to be self-proving, then rather than using signing in the presence of a witness, you need to use a qualified electronic signature. So the 1995 Act, as I say, has been restructured a little bit. It was restructured actually back in 2012. So we now have Part 2, which deals with signing of documents which are on paper, parchment, or some other tangible surface, so wet ink signatures. And then we've got Part 3, which deals with the signing of electronic documents. And so effectively, we have two sections within the 1995 Act that deal with electronic signing. And then in addition to that, in 2014, the Scottish Parliament passed the Electronic Documents Scotland regulations, and that sets out more technical detail around the execution of electronic documents, including the standard of signature that needs to be used for different types of documents. So I mentioned before that there's a requirement to use an advanced electronic signature for validity of Section 1.2 documents, and a QAS for a document needs to be registered. Well, that's set out in the 2014 regulations. The one thing the 2014 regulations don't currently deal with, because it's not been brought into force yet, is the execution of wills and testamentary writings. So for the time being, those can't be signed electronically, but all other documents under Section 1.2 can be. So just as a reminder, if you can't remember what Section 1.2 covers, that's on screen. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but just as a reminder, it's basically contracts that are to do with real rights in land. It covers basically sort of gratuitous unilateral obligations, except where they are given in the course of business, so effectively a promise or a one-way obligation. And it also covers certain rights to do with certain documents to do with trust as well. So things that will be in scope and therefore subject to these rules will be missives and dispositions, some leases, servitudes, and potentially personal guarantees if those are not given in the course of business. So one of the questions that we get quite a lot is around self-proving, and many documents for many years under Scots law have been signed in the presence of a witness, because under the 1995 Act, that means the document self-proving, and therefore, if you seek to rely upon it, it is assumed to have been signed by the party that signed it. And we've all done that for many years because it's a very easy and quick way of getting that protection. And when we look at electronic signing, some people are reluctant to move away from that because they think that by losing self-proving status, they expose themselves to particular risks. So I suppose the question here is that a real risk for your organisation or not? And it's something which I guess you need to look at depending on the nature of the contract that you're actually dealing with. So step one is look at what your signing protocols say. You may have internal protocols which set out how documents are signed, but just because they say something written in a wet ink world doesn't mean to say that that's not something which you might want to challenge, because actually the benefits in terms of signing electronically, in terms of speed and convenience, may actually outweigh outweigh the risk of or the additional complication of signing that in the presence of a witness and not being able to sign it quite so quickly. So actually, do you really need self-proving status or not? If you use an e-signing platform, then yes, it is only a simple electronic signature and it's not self-proving, but actually you do get a large amount of information from the signing platform, and Fiona will show you that in the demo, in terms of the evidence that you get, which in many cases would make it quite difficult for someone to say that they hadn't actually signed that document. And therefore, in many cases, the risk of a challenge to whether that document was actually signed by that person is probably also going to be quite remote. So that then leads us on to the question about choosing the right type of electronic signature. As I say, in many cases, using a simple electronic signature will be fine in the standard signing functionality in the signing platform. But what we say to clients is look at the risk of the documents that you are looking to have signed. What's the value of that contract? What is the risk of it being challenged? If it's a commercial contract, will the parties immediately start performing it? In which case, the likelihood of someone challenging that would be low because they'd already be performing it. What level of assurance is provided in the platform that you're using? So those are all the sorts of factors that you might want to consider. And certainly, if you compare inserting a JPEG scan of someone's signature into a Word document with using an electronic signing platform, you can see that the signing platform is going to provide you with much more assurance around the fact that it was signed by that particular person, because the security built into these platforms will ensure that you can link it to an email address, you know the date and time of the signing, the document's locked after it's been signed. Whereas with a signature in a Word document, you don't know who actually added that in, and you don't know whether the document has been edited after that has been done. So we would certainly expect most clients to choose a signing platform for most contracts. And then the question is about which type of signing you use, whether you use the standard functionality or whether you want to or you need to use an advanced electronic signature or a qualified electronic signature. So the signing platforms that I mentioned, there are many platforms out there. We use DocuSign, but there's many others, including Adobe Sign and EchoSign and people like that. They all work largely in the same way, and that is that they enable anyone to sign the document from any device as long as they've got an internet connection. So once the document's been set up for signing, the recipient will get an email. They just go in and click to sign that, and that's the process done. And they make it really easy to sign. You can use it for one document with one or two signers, but actually if you have lots of documents to be signed or lots of different parties, you can create workflow to deal with all of that and make sure the right people sign the right document. You can also integrate it into other workflow systems, such as contract management systems or other systems you may have, so that the signing process is created automatically. And as I say, once the document is signed in the signing platform, it's then locked after signing using encryption to prevent further changes. And if someone tries to edit it, then the signature will effectively fall off that document. So you know once it's been signed that is the document as it was in that version. You get an audit trail, and we'll show you all that information in the demo in terms of what you get there. And there are also options to add in two-factor authentication and other steps to make to add an additional level of assurance around the signing process and making sure it is the right person who's signing that document. And then finally, as I say, the standard signing functionality in these platforms is a standard simple electronic signature, but many of the platforms now offer advanced electronic signatures and qualified electronic signatures as well, using an online ID verification process. So if you do have a document that, for example, needs to be registered in the Books Council in session, it is now possible to sign that electronically and use a QS to do that. And we use that for lots of documents that we advise on where there's a requirement for that to be signed electronically, for example, missives and things like that. So that's just an overview, I suppose, of the law and the background to that. We will now move to the demo, and I'll hand over to Fiona, who will do that and show you how the process works.
Thank you very much, Martin. So I hope everyone can see my screen with the DocuSign on it. This is where we start when we're using DocuSign. There's a home page where, as you can see, there's a very helpful start button. What we found with lawyers when they started to use this was it was extremely intuitive. So really, if you just follow the big yellow buttons, you can't really go wrong. So I'll just demonstrate a very simple signature using Martin as our guinea pig. So let's hope the technology works. Can I just check that everyone can see that screen? Yep, thank you. So if I click on start and I'm going to click send an envelope, and what I get here, there is a screen inviting me to upload the document that I want to be signed. And when I go in to look at that, it takes me into my hard drive. And here's one I made earlier, a test document for signature. So I just select that and open, and that uploads into DocuSign, and there it's sitting there. The next thing I want to do is to say who's going to sign it. And for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to type in Martin's details. If I had multiple signatories, I would just keep adding a recipient, and I could set a signing order if I wanted them to sign in a particular order. And that can be important for some documents. You want to make sure someone else signs before you do. Within DocuSign, there's lots of functionality where you can customize how this goes out to people. You can customize when you want it to be sent out. You can have personalized messages, and you can also set security. So for example, for each signatory, you can give them a different access code or two-factor authentication. So they have to type that in before they can access the document. And that's a really useful security feature. You also can specify within DocuSign which kind of electronic signature you want to be applied. And you'll see there's this qualified one that Martin mentioned. That's sort of enhanced functionality of DocuSign. It doesn't come as standard, but we use that quite a lot in Brodies, so that's why we've got that. But I'm just going to ask Martin to apply a simple electronic signature. So if I move to the next screen, here's the document that I want Martin to sign. And it's really very simple. I want him to sign just in the middle there. So I'm going to go to the left and drag across that signature field. And there it is. And that's all I'm actually going to do for the purposes of this demo. You can see from all these other fields that there's lots of other things you can do. You can make it quite complicated if you want to, but for most of us, all you're ever going to want is a signature and possibly a date, although DocuSign will tell you when everything was signed. So I'm just going to leave it at that, and I'm going to click send. And that's going to go off to Martin. So I will stop sharing and let Martin talk you through what he's received.
And this is where the risk of doing a live demo with IT is always a bit of peril, but that's the email come through already, which is good. So if I share my screen, so you can see here the email that's come through. And again, it says Fiona Beale has sent your document to review and sign, and there's a big yellow button saying review the document. So there we go. You can hopefully all see that, and you'll see that I've landed on a web page on the DocuSign website, asking me to review and act on these documents. So I can see it's come from Fiona Brodies, and now I click on continue. It takes me to the document, and so all I need to do here is click on start. Now, if this document was multiple pages, I could read through that and check that I was happy with it. I could download a copy, just check I was okay with it, and it's the version that I'm expecting to sign. I click on sign, and then I just tap here. Now, because I've used DocuSign before, it's got my stylized signature here, which is basically my name in italics. Now, that is simply a visual representation of me signing. It doesn't really matter where in the document this appears, or indeed what it looks like. What is important is what's going on behind the scenes. But I click there, that's the document signed, and then I just click on finish, and that is the process done. It pops up and asks me if I want to log into my DocuSign account and then give you a copy of that. But I'll let Fiona show you what happens in the...
Share my screen again. Okay, so I think DocuSign is just registering that Martin has done that. So I've moved from home, which was where I uploaded the document, the start point, and now I'm clicking on manage, where you'll see I've got something that looks very much like an Outlook inbox with what I've received. and what I've sent, which is still saying that it's waiting for Martin, but I think that's just uploading. So just while we're waiting for that to update, I should say that DocuSign throughout this has been keeping me updated using normal emails sent to my normal Outlook, explaining where we are in the signing process. So I received an email saying that Martin had viewed the document, and I received an email saying that Martin had signed the document as well. And that email that was sent to me had 2 PDFs attached to it. One was an email that had a PDF that had the signed document, and the other was a PDF of what DocuSign calls a certificate of completion, or a signing certificate, and that is the audit trail that Martin mentioned earlier. So hopefully you can now see on my screen that I have a notification saying complete with DocuSign, and the status is completed. So if I just click on that notification, I come to another screen where I'm able to do a whole lot of things in terms of seeing what's gone on and to download my audit trail. If I just very briefly click on more and on history, there we see a history of what's happened with this envelope. It's pretty granular, as you can see. Absolutely everything that's happened is recorded here. When I sent it to Martin, when he opened it, when he viewed it, when he signed it, and when it came back to me. So that is the kind of trail of what's gone on. But the actual audit trail, the thing that we would rely on if we ever had a challenge to signature, is within the certificate of completion. So let's have a look at that. So if I go to the download button, I'm able to combine the document that I sent and the signing certificate. I can combine that into one file. That's quite useful because when you want to extract this document out of DocuSign and into your own document management system, you'll want to keep the certificate of completion ideally as part of the agreement, or certainly in the same folder as it, so you can keep the two close together. So I'm going to download those, and hopefully a PDF will come up in a moment. Right, that's great. So the first thing to show you is the signature panel, and I'm in my happy place of a green tick, signed and all signatures are valid. So thank goodness that bit worked. So that's great, that's what we wanted to see. The next thing I will show you is this document ID, the envelope ID number. Now that's a unique number that comes every time you send a new envelope, whether you've got one document in it or 100 documents in it. There will be a DocuSign envelope ID that is stamped automatically onto every document within that envelope. And that way you can always keep track of what went out in an envelope and match that up to the certificate of completion that goes with that envelope. So you always know what goes with what. We can see there the representation of Martin's signature. He talked about that. And then if I scroll down, as part of this file, we've got the certificate of completion. And this is where all the metadata, all the information that shows what has happened to this document and provides evidence of its signature is contained. There, right at the top, we've got the envelope ID, so we can match that up with the documents if they ever become separated. And then it basically tells you everything that has gone on, who sent it, but most importantly for us, who the signer was and when they did what they did with it. So we can see that it's gone to Martin, what his email address is. We know the IP address. That's another useful cross-check if there was ever any concern that it had gone somewhere it shouldn't have done. We can see when it was sent, when Martin viewed, when he signed. In this bit here, we've got security level. Now, I didn't apply any security to this document, but if I'd done two-factor authentication or created another kind of access code myself, that would appear there. So that would be on the certificate of completion. If I'd asked Martin to sign using that enhanced digital signature, the qualified electronic signature, that would also be recorded at this point here as well. And then the other things at the bottom, none of these applied here, but if, for example, I'd asked for something for Neil to receive a copy of the document after Martin had sent it, I could have built that into the workflow, and that would appear under carbon copy events. It would record that Neil had received a copy and when he'd received that copy. So that is all I want to show you on those documents. I will now stop sharing and pass you back to Martin.
Thanks, Fiona. So we're just going to finish off with a couple of tips and recommendations before going to any questions that have come in. So first off, I'd say you may have internal standing orders or signing authorities, so it's worth checking what those say around the signing of documents, because it may be that they specifically mandate that certain things have to be signed in wetting. So if you're looking to move to electronic signing, then it's always worth just checking exactly what the wording says and reviewing whether those need to be updated. The second thing, we've worked with quite a few clients in this, is actually we recommend setting out a playbook which sets out your approach to signing electronic documents. As you'll see from today, there are lots of different types of documents. There are different ways they can be signed. Some of them will be required by law to be signed in a particular way. Other ones, there may be no legal requirement as to how they are signed, but there might be other factors which mean that you consider them to be perhaps a higher risk, and therefore you might not want to use standard signing functionality, or you may decide for some reason that you think these must always be signed in wet ink. So what we'd recommend you do is actually create a playbook for your approach to signing so that everyone is clear as an organisation as to how different types of documents can be signed, and that avoids confusion and inconsistency in the approach that you're taking, and also ensures that someone has actually thought about the risk and decided on a preferred approach, and then that is set out and written down somewhere. You may sometimes see people adding in clauses around the signing of documents electronically. Under Scots law, under English law in the UK, there's no requirement to actually say that the document needs to be signed electronically. It is a US thing, which I believe applies in certain US states, and so it's a standard thing which DocuSign and some of the other platforms will add in a sort of docket or wording. Some people will put clauses in the contract, but there's no need to do that within the contract. It's either going to be valid or it's not going to be valid, and writing a clause into the contract isn't going to make a difference to that in terms of what the law says. And as I say, following on from the point around the playbook, it's really important just to make sure that you're ensuring that the right person is signing the document. So with electronic signing, making sure that you still ensure that documents are signed by the right person, the right level for that document, and you're using the right type of signature. So again, a playbook can help with all of that and just make sure that everyone's following the right process. And just some drafting tips which are on the next slide. If we can just move to that. So these are kind of stylistic things, but under Scots law, the way that the 95 Act works is it talks about authenticating documents rather than signing them when it's electronic. It doesn't really make a difference. You can still refer to things being signed, but you might want to talk about authentication rather than signing. You don't need to have a place of signing in there. So for that, when you're signing electronically, so you can remove that. You may want to think about the date of signing and where that goes in. So Fiona showed you the fields that can be added in DocuSign. You can have an automatic date of signing added in there, but you might want to actually have that manually or have a commencement date written into the contract if it needs to be a different date. Excuse me. And then finally, you may have documents that are set up with witness blocks. If you sign something in the presence of a witness electronically under Scots law, it doesn't make it self-proving. The law is very clear in that the only way for it to be self-proving is to use a qualified electronic signature. So if your document has a witness block in there for self-proving status, then you should remove that from the document. It might be that your standing orders or whatever may require signing in the presence of a witness, in which case you may want to keep that in if you decide not to change your process. But just remember that signing in the presence of a witness won't make an electronic document self-proving in the same way that it would for a wet ink document. And just to finish off, we've got a table here just to try and summarise. I appreciate there's quite a lot of information we've given to you in the last half an hour or so about different types of documents, but this table is really designed just to summarise the different approach that applies to different types of documents, depending on whether they are Section 1.2, whether they need to be registered, and then how the law deals with it in terms of requirements for wet ink or electronic documents. And I think the main takeaway from this is actually there are very few documents now under Scots law that cannot be signed electronically. Yes, there are particular requirements for some of these documents, but for most of them, there's no prohibition on that, unless you're dealing with documents that need to be registered in one of the land registries. And that, I think, is us. So there's a link here to the Law Society of Scotland guidance, which Niall mentioned at the outset. So Fiona and I were both involved in the Law Society's working group on this. This was published back in, was a draft in March 2020, the start of the pandemic. We've been working on it for a year or so at that point. And it's been updated a couple of times since then, and it's well worth a read in terms of understanding what the law says, and it's got some really useful practical guidance to deal with some of the issues that we talked about today. And I think on that, it's back to you, Neil, for any questions.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Fiona. I think you deserve particular credit for the live demonstration. I certainly found that a white knuckle experience, and I wasn't the one delivering it, so well done. First question is for you, Fiona. So if you're using a signing platform like DocuSign, do all the people signing have to have licenses or subscriptions with the provider?
They do not, and that's one of the reasons it's so popular. So the only entity or person that needs to have the subscription are the people who are setting things up for signature. So, for example, with Brodies, we have a subscription with DocuSign, and that enables us to send out documents to clients and counterparties, and they can all sign that with abandon. They don't need to have a subscription at all. They just need to have a device and access to the internet.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Fiona. Martin, a question for you. People are used to signing hard copy documents in a self-proving way, so with a witness. In your experience when using e-signatures, are people using qualified electronic signatures to get a similar effect?
So the answer is it's a typical lawyer's answer, which is that it depends, and it depends on the type of document. So for the most part, say, commercial contracts, most of them, people are fairly comfortable signing them just with a standard electronic signature. While you can get a qualified electronic signature through the signing platforms, there is a bit more friction. It's not quite as quick because you have to go through the ID verification process, which can be done through an app or in a video call, but it just adds time and slows things down a bit. So for most contracts, we're seeing people just sign them. They'd be quite happy to sign them with the standard signing functionality, perhaps with two-factor authentication or something like that, just to give a bit more assurance. The one exception to that, I think, is in relation to banking documents, so particularly securities or guarantees, where people are not looking to rely upon that document straight away, and it may be some months or years before people actually then need to rely upon it. And with a guarantee, the last thing you want is someone saying, well, I never signed that 2 years ago. And so we find that for those things, people are a bit more risk averse, because you don't want, if you're relying on a guarantee, you're already in a sticky situation. You don't want someone saying, well, I didn't sign that. Someone must have hacked into my email account and signed it. And so for those, we're seeing it much more common for people to use the qualified electronic signature on that to give that additional level of assurance.
Okay, great, thanks. And the final question we have is in relation to signing a particular type of document. Now, I'm mindful of the table that Martin put up that required you to work through various things before we could give a view on that. So I'm not going to put our speakers on the spot. And what I would do is encourage the person that asked that question about the Planning Act to get in touch with Martin and Fiona or me direct with your contact details, and we'll come back to you on that. We'll give it a bit of thought. I think that's probably the best thing to do. So thank you all for your engagement and for joining this webinar. The third and final webinar in our Local Government Academy series is about the role of the monitoring officer, and I'll be presenting that along with my colleague Douglas more generally. And with that, I just leave by saying thank you again to Martin and to Fiona for that really informative session, and thank you all for joining this afternoon.